Hello and welcome to the Autoblog Podcast. Welcome to 2019. I'm Greg Migliore. Joining me today in the studio is Associate Editor Joel Stocksdale. Happy New Year. Welcome back. How's it going?
Going well. How about you?
It's going good. I'm a little bit nasally. My sinuses have blown up. That can only mean one thing. It is the Detroit Auto Show. We're recording this on a Friday. All the good stuff is going to start happening over the weekend. So if you're listening to this, be sure to head back to Autoblog. We'll have all the great reveals next week and some of the stuff that's going to come out over the weekend. Lots of big reveals planned. We'll talk about that a little bit later, do a little bit of a preview. We'll lead things off, though, with what we've been driving, the Toyota RAV4 Hybrid, the Nissan Altima, and then we'll dive a little bit into kind of our opinions, I'd say, on the Audi A8L and what that big sedan, that flagship sedan segment means. And I just got out of the BMW X4. I drove it into the office this morning. I'm going to talk a little bit about this sort of sport activity coupe kind of lifestyle vehicle. Lastly, we've got a really good spend your money, so you're going to want to hang around for that one. So let's jump right in. Toyota RAV4 Hybrid. I liked it. What did you think?
Yeah, I was really impressed. I think this it's a contender for best like small crossover, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think it looks like the Jeep Cherokee though. Do you see that?
I get a little bit of that. It's got this kind of rugged, tough, kind of active lifestyle kind of look to it. Especially, I mean, we didn't have this version, but the adventure version, which has like the extra body cladding and kind of the Toyota truck look, front bumper. It definitely has that sort of off-road personality to it.
Yeah, so I spent the weekend driving it, put a lot of miles on it. I think it's really an interesting option for people who want this compact crossover. I think it's technically a compact crossover, but it's a hybrid. So that's, to me, Toyota is really checking all the boxes, meeting right in the middle of like the Venn diagram about where things are going. And I really liked it. I found the backseat to be a little tight. That's not really indicative of the hybrid or the RAV4 even. That's just more like the class. Like I said, I think it looked pretty good. Even though I think it looks pretty Jeepy, I think it might have just been that red paint is the one we had it in, which is like sort of the color you see a lot of Jeep Cherokees and Grand Cherokees in. But I enjoyed driving it. It handled pretty well. You can see out of it pretty well. The Toyota infotainment system's pretty good, I think. I didn't do anything super crazy. It didn't even snow when I had it, which was disappointing. I would have liked to have, you get a vehicle like that and it's kind of like, hey, let's get a little bit of snow, I mean, inevitably you get a Mustang or something and then, hey, boom, the snow flies, but hey, that's life. So I liked it. I think it really is like a smart move for Toyota to have this, add hybrid tech to the RAV4. And I like what they did with it too, to really go back to the design a little bit. I think, I pulled up behind another RAV4, the last gen, just a light on the way into work. And I thought to myself, I really like this one a lot better. I like this kind of outdoorsy look. The last one has more of it's really a generic look. I don't really feel the outgoing model. The last couple of generations, I think it speaks to Toyota taking some risks, which, for years people pan them for not doing that. So yeah, I dig it. I have one complaint, but what do you think? More impressions?
Yeah, I completely agree. This is a way more interesting vehicle than the last one. Like you said, the last one was it's just generic. It just looks like a crossover. I mean, if you didn't see the badges, you'd be hard pressed to even know what it was. But this one, it's angular, it's aggressive, it's wide. It actually looks pretty mean. But importantly, it's not just that. It actually drives pretty well. Like the steering is quick. It rides well. Visibility is fantastic.
It's almost like a 90s car or something with the thinner pillars.
Bit, yeah.
I really dug that.
And I was actually impressed. It feels fairly quick too. I mean, it's not fast by any means, but it's about 200 horsepower. I mean, that's pretty solid.
First drive by James Riswick, I believe, right?
Yeah.
And it's, he mentions that it's basically the sportiest of the RAV4 lineup. So I think that's cool. It's reasonably priced. The fuel economy is great. Combined rating is 39 mpg. That is solid. Now, here's my one complaint. I do not feel like I got anywhere near 39 mpg. I didn't totally document it, but looking at like roughly how far I went and then, how much fuel this thing holds, I did not approach that. So, I mean, it's cold out, that could have factored into it. But, I would like to, before I give a real final verdict, I definitely want to do some more documented testing. But just in my weekend, I was like, wow, this thing really, drank half a tank of gas, like really quick, it seemed. And I didn't go that far. So that was my one complaint.
Yeah, I should have reset the fuel economy gauge before I was driving it around a lot, but I felt like it was still doing decently. When I got it, it said average, like, just shy of 30 miles per gallon. And in all my driving, it didn't really get any worse, and it did creep up a little bit. So, and I was mostly driving in town, so it felt decent. I think that still falls short of the EPA numbers, but it was all right anyway.
Yeah, and like I said, I didn't, document every exact mile.
Yeah,
but
this is, very anecdotal, not even close to scientific.
Right, right.
One other thing I wanted to mention, though, I love the interior on this car.
Totally agree.
It's really stylish, and it's got really nice little details. I love the little, spiral, what's the word? The spiral embossing on the rubberized knobs and stuff.
I know what you're talking about. Don't know what that word is, though.
Yeah. It looks really cool, and it feels really nice and hefty when you grab it. And even the door grabs have this nice sort of grippy, tough, heavy rubber feel to it that it makes it all feel very rugged and solid and easy to clean. Although those little indents on the knobs, I do kind of worry a little bit about stuff getting stuck in there.
Yeah.
Over time. That's something that I was a little concerned about. But in the meantime, they are really nice.
I eat a lot in cars, more than I probably should admit to. I did eat in this car, but yeah, that could be a problem with a donut or something.
Mm-hmm.
Not great. Bagel, salty bagel.
And I also liked the little storage cubbies in the dashboard, and I liked the sort of diamond kind of embossing in the plastics in those cubbies and on the speaker doors. Just a lot of really nice design details that show that Toyota went an extra step to make the RAV4 kind of interesting and kind of cool.
I think the old RAV4s used to feel borderline cheap. I mean, they were a true compact SUV. This one feels more like, I'll go there, I'll use the cliche, a class above a little bit, maybe a half a class above. But it's a very nice vehicle. I agree with you. The interior is very solid. And I think it wins for its simplicity. There's a lot of just very simple horizontal lines. It all just you sit in it, you're comfortable. It's all laid out pretty well. The materials were pretty good. Yeah, that was the RAV4 Hybrid.
I do, before we take off from that though, I do have a complaint myself about it. And that's, for the most part, I like all the controls, but it kind of annoyed me how small the buttons are for changing fan speed and changing which fans come on, and also the buttons for the shortcuts to home or radio, navigation, things like that. They're really small, and especially on the infotainment, all of those little skinny buttons, they're labeled just with words in all caps, all in the same color. So at a glance, it's kind of hard to tell exactly which button does what. So it would take a moment for my eyes to refocus from the road back to the buttons, and then to squint at these little bitty words to figure out what the buttons do. I think those should be a little bit bigger, maybe even use pictographs to kind of make it obvious which buttons are which. But other than that, I really like the RAV4. It's a really good little crossover.
So I will pile on there and say, yeah, the buttons were a little small, a little hard to use. And then to go one step further, to reach out and get the different knobs, which I like to do with, especially with press cars where you don't have time to set up all your presets. I'm an average height, it's just couldn't quite, comfortably reach everything, but hey, that's life.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, very strong car. We're going to do some driver's notes on that. This month, we're going to rate it. So come back if you're thinking of buying a RAV4, specifically the RAV4 Hybrid. We spent a lot of time in it. Got to check it out. So let's move on to the 2019 Nissan Altima. Good looking car. We had one in platinum trim. This had a 188 horsepower 4-cylinder. Of course, they had the CVT. It was a very nice car. We had a little bit of a debate on Slack. Slack is our like inter-office, outer-office communications channel. For those of you that maybe use it or don't know what it is, that's like a thing. Very modern America kind of communication. I digress. But we were debating if it looked good or not. I think it was James Riswick also was weighing and saying it kind of looks like a bunch of different concept cars, like cobbled together. I like it. I tweeted about it. I have written some notes on it. I think it looks great. I like the attitude in the front end too, where like that V like goes all the way to the ground. I mean, there's no bumpers, it seems like, on cars anymore, the way like real bolted on bumpers anyway. It's all very integrated. The headlights look good. I will give you guys, or some of the dissenters, that the back gets a little bit busy, but I think that looks good. This is a segment right now where you're seeing tons of like style layers, like layers upon layers of styling. And I think that's helped make these cars seem more premium than they are. And for the Altima, I think it works.
Yeah, I think I'm almost pretty much middle of the road on this styling wise. I think it looks fine. I don't think it looks terrible. I don't know. I'm waffling a lot here, but basically my problem with it is that the whole car looks pretty restrained, pretty conservative, except for like two main things, and that's the really deep grille that you mentioned, and also the floating roof design, where the C-pillar, the painted part, like comes up really sharply, kind of almost extreme, even more so than the Maxima, which is like a really swoopy looking large sedan. And I feel like those two like really extreme design points look a little strange on a car that otherwise is very conservative. I don't think it looks terrible, but I do feel like there's a couple of things that aren't working together as well as they could be.
It's I'd say it's the ambitious design too. Inside it was pretty nice. I thought the inside was actually fairly simple, fairly basic compared to the outside, which has all these different things going on. But yeah, can see out of it pretty good. Again, that was sort of the theme of the cars I drove this week. I thought the inside looked pretty good. I think it's a tough segment too, though. When I look at like just the competitive set here, you've got the Accord, you've got, the Mazda 6. I actually really like the Chevy Malibu too. I mean, there's a lot of cars in the segment that, that you can compare this with, and they're all fairly close. Like, I don't think there's like a car in that segment that is truly bad, or I would say, ooh, I wouldn't go there. I mean, there's some that definitely rank farther down the food chain, but a lot are pretty good. And I would say this is not best in class. I think it's definitely put the Accord above it. I like how the Mazda drives, quite a bit better. And then this kind of, I think, is in that sort of second tier of pretty good. You probably want to consider it because, people don't necessarily buy cars based on rankings. For a lot of people, cars are like an appliance. You look and it's like, well, my dishwasher's in the top 5. Hey, that's good enough for me. I would put the Altima in that like top 5-ish as far as rating these.
Yeah, I think I feel pretty similarly. The interior, I was a little bit underwhelmed, considering that it was the Platinum, which is like right up there at the top of the Altima food chain. The fake wood looks really fake. And besides that, there wasn't a whole lot that made it super fancy. But what I did appreciate about it was that it was a very roomy interior. The driving position was really good. I love how simple and easy the controls were. And the knobs actually feel nice, almost a little bit Audi-like. It's got that kind of not quite mechanical, sort of like click, click, click to the knobs. It feels really nice. And all the buttons are like just the right size. They're easy to use. The infotainment is pretty decent. Not the best, but it does all right. It does have CarPlay, which is something that Nissan is finally starting to add. I also mostly like the way it drove. The chassis I think is excellent. It rides really, really smoothly. It's a very supple ride, but it's a very eager chassis. Like if you start throwing it through corners, it responds really fast and is really stable. It's just a shame that the steering is pretty lifeless. That was my biggest complaint with it, was that the steering just it's not great. But the rest of it kind of made up for it, and I ended up quite liking it. I do feel like it's not top of class also. I think Accord is probably best. Probably right behind that Mazda 6 and Camry. But I would put this up like Malibu, which I actually like also. I don't think it necessarily gets as much attention as it should. One of the things I like about the Malibu being that it's probably the most comfortable car in the segment, and that's something that I'm sure people are interested in. That's probably the most comfortable one. But anyway, back to Altima. I think it's right there with like Malibu. It's a great all-arounder. It's comfortable. It actually handles pretty well. I mean, it's definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's funny. I had my driver's notes in front of me and then I lost them. So I was trying to dig through my Google Docs here, trying to find them. Steering spot on. It's like, I was kind of like almost all over the road with that car. The steering was so, just loose. It was numb. I don't know. I really think they should tune that up a bit. Mm-hmm. Comfortable car though. Like you said, the suspension is pretty solid. It's, pretty well calibrated, that sort of thing. I think Nissan has done enough to keep this car where it needs to be. For a while, I was reading, like right before like sedans started to drop, this was actually like the number 3 selling vehicle in America. Maybe it was the number 3 selling car, but this car had a really lofty position on the sales charts for a while. And I think Nissan has done enough to keep it in a good place, keep it interesting too. And if you're in the market for a car like this, to your point, Joel, you should take a look at it because, maybe, the Mazda ends up being more to your taste, but also Mazda's driving dynamics are not for everybody. They definitely skew more enthusiast. Again, I think the Accord is just a great looking car. And overall, I think that is the segment leader right now. Ford Fusion's pretty good. I think that's pretty old though. So I wouldn't put the Altima behind it. That's for sure. Malibu is excellent. Well, it's getting a little older too. The design, I think, of the Malibu is excellent, though. I think in some cases, that's a car Chevy hasn't gotten enough credit for. I think they launched it at the right time, but just the segment was starting to evaporate, and I believe they're killing that car this year. So it's an interesting time for sedans, I think. Any final thoughts on the Altima?
One other thing that's worth noting is that this particular one was all-wheel drive. That's a new feature for Altima this year. And that would be a reason to check it out because Accord doesn't offer that. So like if you feel you do need all-wheel drive, I mean this is a good option with it. Besides that, I mean it's a solid car. Oh, it is also so much better than the old one. The old one was not good. It did the job, but like pretty much everything else in the segment was better. This is finally like competitive.
The old one was one that actually sold very well too. I think this car is really good at being a sedan too. You mentioned the all-wheel drive. That's a really smart move, I think, as far as Nissan's product planning strategy. Like, get that in there. You're going to sell more of those in this part of the country, especially. Mm-hmm. And the back seat's big. The trunk is pretty big. This is like a car that it's a very solid sedan. I honestly, I don't know why consumers don't buy sedans as much anymore. But hey, it is what it is. Mm-hmm. So that's it for the Altima. Now, Joel and I have each just literally gotten out of 2 pretty interesting vehicles. Joel was in the A8 with the long wheelbase, which is a long car. Mm-hmm. And I just got out of the X4. I drove it to the office a few hours ago. I think both these vehicles are good for sort of discussion points, jumping off points for these segments. You mentioned a little bit earlier off microphone that you're not totally on board with the big flagship sedans anymore. Apparently the A8L didn't change your thoughts.
No, and actually what's funny is that I think the A8L, man, it's not easy to say fast.
It's tough to say, right?
Yeah. and I think it may be my favorite of the 3 German cars at this point, at least to drive. It is extremely comfortable. It's extremely quiet. It's just a very solid, heavy vehicle, and the interior is great. It's really cool. When you start it up, if you've got the climate control on, it hides away these panels that were covering up the air vents. That they're like these nice wood panels, and they disappear into the dashboard. It's really stylish, and actually, you can get them to come back out if you turn off the air vent. It'll cover it up for you.
That's pretty nifty.
Yeah, it's got 2 big touchscreens that have a really neat feature that I like, where it's a touchscreen, but to actually open up a menu, you actually have to press down and get this physical like click, which is nice if you're driving on like a rough road or something. I've had situations where I'm just about to press something, there's a bump in the road, and I press the wrong thing. I'm like, come on. And so I'm having to go back. And so this prevents like accidental clicks and things. But the thing about like big, large flagship sedans that I'm not too keen on is that none of them are all that fun to drive. They really they really do sort of feel like they're trying to isolate you from everything possible, which, I mean, I get that that's kind of the idea, but I'd like something that's a little bit more involving. Like, this just feels like a really huge thing that I'm just kind of having to sit in for a while. Like, I'm not being engaged at all. I feel like I'm waiting.
Interesting.
Yeah,
that's a good line for if we do some driver's notes or something. I just feel like I'm waiting in this car, you know?
Yeah, and like even having it in comfort mode, it's got this big forced induction V6 under the hood, but in comfort mode, the gas pedal is calibrated so that like if you want to accelerate fast, you've got to really shove your foot in the throttle. Like just normal usage, it's super smooth and kind of slow. That changes.
I'll watch out for that tonight then, because I'm driving the A8L tonight as well.
Yeah, that changes if you put it in dynamic. But yeah, I don't know. I don't find it that appealing to drive something that's just kind of big and heavy, doesn't handle all that great. It just kind of just feels like this isolation chamber. The one exception to all this is that I actually like the Cadillac CT6, and it's because that feels more like a sports sedan to me. When you're driving it, it feels smaller and it feels more nimble, and I like the way that drives. But S-Class, 7 Series, A8, I'm just not big on them.
Interesting take. So I'll be driving the A8L. Now I just like saying it. I'll be taking that tonight. So we might revisit this on the podcast next week. We'll see. But just kind of like a mini hot take here. To riff on that sedan segment, just for a little bit here. I have not driven the A8 in a while. It's not my favorite in the class, though. The S-Class is so luxurious and so decadent, and it's a good-looking car. From a driver's perspective, I don't love it. But these are huge cars, to your point. I think the 7 Series and the CT6 are probably the best driving cars in that class. I really like the CT6. That's a very fun car to drive. I haven't driven the one with the twin turbo V6, which is, I guess, get it while you can. They said it was going to be a Cadillac exclusive engine. I imagine they'll put that in something else. Seems like it would go great in the mid-engine Corvette, right? But yeah, I really like that car, and I do enjoy the 7 Series. I drove that car on a track at Monticello in New York a few years back. It handles well, it steers well. I still feel like BMW does the best job of making whatever size car or SUV you have very like still connected and having their genetics throughout the lineup. Whereas the A8 really, the last time I drove one, felt like a luxury barge. Whereas the rest of Audi's lineup, even the A6 doesn't feel like that plodding, that like slow, if you will. So I'll be interested to drive this one tonight, which is a very big car too.
Yeah, I actually drove it down into the garage, was that yesterday? Yeah, and like I pulled up to where I thought was kind of far enough in, and I hopped out and saw that there was probably like a fifth of the car still hanging out of the parking space, and so I started creeping it further and further
wow.
up just to make sure that it fit. It's so big.
Ooh, big car, big car.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so moving on to what I just got out of, and then I don't know if this is like a segment that has no name. It's like trading keys, but you're going to have the X4 this weekend. That's what I've been driving for the last 2 days. I know the sort of sport activities coupe segment it's a bit controversial. I think less so. Like the X6 was the one that really sort of pioneered the segment. X4, of course, was added because everybody started buying X6s. Mercedes had to follow with the GLE and GLC coupes. But I like the X4. This is my like random take here. I like the like sort of coupe styling. I just like sort of this, would you call it like a small, I don't know if it's compact or not, but it's a smaller SUV. Although the X4 is still pretty big at this point.
Yeah, I think it is technically compact. I mean, sort of the way like RAV4 is technically compact. I mean, everything keeps getting bigger and bigger.
The compact category is like a drinking game because when I think of what used to be compact, you're talking like a Ford Focus or something, like an older Ford Focus. Now it's like these like things that are as big as like mid-size SUVs or crossovers 5-6 years ago are still compact. I digress. But X4 was fun to drive. This was the X30, so that's the 4-cylinder, I believe.
6-cylinder.
Wait.
Oh yeah, 30. Yeah,
30 is the 4-cylinder.
30 is the 4-cylinder. 40 is the 6-cylinder. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
They keep changing the names.
They do. Yeah. I was thinking out loud there, but engine was pretty peppy. One thing I like about basically all BMWs is you can like use the Sport, Eco Pro, Comfort mode, and like you notice a difference in the powertrain calibration depending on the car. Like the M cars, there's a lot more differentiation, but the steering, braking, things like that. So I think that was cool. Yeah, I just like driving this car. It's one of those things where I wouldn't call it a guilty pleasure. I know if I were going to buy one, I wouldn't buy an X4 and an X6. You can't see out the back of these things. It's comical how bad the visibility is. And I actually think the car is beefy. And it also, I think what they've done is the X4 and the X6 used to look a bit different than the other X's, if you will. Now I feel like they've basically made it to like, we're just going to tailor the sizes of the BMW SUVs. So they all basically look the same, which I don't feel like this like sort of like severe coupe roofline is as present, at least from a visual perspective, as it used to be. And that's disappointing to me. I feel like this is, X5, X3. Like, I feel like these are all starting to look alike. I feel like the coupe part is fading a little bit to my eye. And that was, I'd say, my complaint about this. I also think the interior, which I really liked, very comfortable. I like the BMW infotainment, but I did feel like the door panels, the sides, there's a lot of like sort of like bulky pieces and trim. And it's just, to me, BMWs used to be a bit more simple than this. So I got in there and I'm like, wow, this is interesting. This car just feels like it's kind of coming at me a little bit more than Bimmers used to. So I wouldn't say that's a good or a bad thing. It's just, I thought, wow, BMWs, like they're joining this craze of like really layering on the style. So yeah, that's my hot take on it. You're going to drive it this weekend.
Yeah. And I'm sure it's going to drive well. Cause I mean, I like the way the X3 drives. I was actually impressed with it. And that's significant too, because a lot of BMWs lately just haven't done it for me. Like they don't feel quite as connected and involving as they once were. So I'm sure it'll drive fine, but I hate these coupe SUVs on principle. They drive me crazy. Because it's it's like it's taking the worst aspects of sedans and SUVs and combining them into one vehicle. It doesn't have the cargo carrying capacity of a real SUV. But it's just as heavy and thirsty and worse to drive as an SUV.
Joel, you like to define your segments clearly, and I respect you for that.
And I guess one of the other things is that I feel almost like it's a little bit, I don't know. I feel like I wouldn't be as upset if they like really committed to doing something kind of absurd. If it was an actual like 2 doors, super impractical kind of SUV, I might be on board just because, like, listen, I don't know, if you're going, if
they
you're
call
going
it a coupe, man. It's a coupe.
Yeah, it's got 4 doors and a hatchback.
Right.
That's not a coupe. I don't know. If you're gonna do something, frankly, fairly stupid, commit to it and like go all out. So on principle, it just annoys me. It feels like a compromise, and it's a compromise of the worst aspects of various vehicles, and that really bothers me.
So what do you think of the X2?
That I don't mind as much.
So that's illogical. How do you like the X2 but hate the X4 and X6?
But the X2 actually has like a real hatchback to it. Basically, they just like chopped the roof line of the X1 and also made like the front end look more aggressive and stuff. That I'm okay with them making like a sporty looking hatchback. It's kind of like the difference between like a Golf and a Scirocco. That I'm okay with.
Interesting analogy to compare to BMW SUVs, but I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, like, because you've got the Golf and then you've got the Scirocco, which is like the chopped, like sleeker version of it. But in both cases, like they still have like a real hatchback and are mostly practical. Whereas the X4, the X6, they basically put a sedan body on a giant SUV and then called it a coupe for some reason.
I like the X2. I think that chopped look is sweet looking.
Yeah, the X2 is cool.
To your point, the hatch is huge. I put a really big stroller back there. I mean, yeah, it's fine. Mm-hmm. I have no problem with any of the even numbered X's. I think we've established that. I like the odd styling. To go back to my earlier thought though, the X4, I guess I agree with you here. I think they should go farther. Like Ford says, you gotta make these things true design statements. Don't just be like, well, okay, this is an X5 or an X3 with a slightly different silhouette. You know, when I'm looking at like the body panels and stuff, I'm like, man, this is like the last generation X4 and X6. I feel like they just had a little more, gravitas than these do. Maybe I'm seeing things that never were there in the first place, but it does feel to me like they toned this down.
Yeah, and I mean, that's one of the other things that's nice about the X2 is that the X2 has its own unique front clip to it. Like the hood, the bumper, the lights, they're all different from the X1. Like the whole thing is one cohesive like redesign of that particular SUV. Whereas with like X4 and X6, it is the front end of like an X3 or an X5, and then they gave it a sedan body.
And I don't like the X1. That's one of the X's I do not like. X1, no thank you. So I think that's... we hit that actually harder than I thought we would. So, I guess to sum up, Joel does not really like flagship sedans or the sport activity crossover segment. I do. That's where we left it, I guess.
Yeah. Agree to disagree. And that's okay.
I guess if we agreed, this would be a really boring podcast.
Probably.
So, cool. Detroit Auto Show?
Yeah.
Let's move on. Like I said, we're excited for this. This is our hometown show. We're recording on Friday. And if you're listening to this, the show starts essentially Sunday night. We're going to have a lot of reveals, embargoed materials that come due at that point. Cadillac is revealing the XT6 on Sunday night. And then Monday, it's just, Super Bowl Monday. Reveal after reveal after reveal. A lot of people have been saying auto shows are dying. LA basically said, no, it's not. Here's the Jeep Gladiator and the new 911 and a bunch of other stuff. Detroit, I think, is still looking pretty strong. I think as we're like approaching the actual show dates, we're seeing more and more about what's going to be there. Yes, a lot of people have bailed. And I think because Detroit is the highest profile media show, those absences are more glaring. But in the past, like car companies would pick and choose. Like basically nobody goes to Chicago anymore. People would pick usually LA and or New York. A lot of those reveals would be more like trim level models. So Detroit just is basically, I think, in the spotlight because it's gotten so much media attention. All that being said, this is going to be a pretty cool show. We're going to see the Supra. We're going to see the Explorer, which we've already seen. Why don't we start there? You went to an event on Wednesday. It was actually at Ford Field. That's where the Lions play football. Not very well, I might add. But you got to see some Explorers on the field. Rear-wheel drive. I think that's really interesting. Let's start there. Why did they go rear-wheel drive?
Yeah, so some of the things that they mentioned that it's useful with making sure that it's got good towing capacity. It's dramatically improved over the previous version. The 4-cylinder, which is the base engine, it now can tow up to 5,300 pounds, whereas the old one only towed up to 3,000 pounds. And the 4-cylinder, it's the turbocharged 2.3 liter 4-cylinder, kind of like what you'll find in Ford Ranger, Ford Mustang, that kind of thing. 300 horsepower, 310 pound-feet of torque. And so the 4-cylinder is no slouch. One of the other things that they noted with rear-wheel drive was that they were actually able to get more interior space, and the reason for that was it's a complicated thing where they went to rear drive with a longitudinal engine that freed up space up front so that they could turn the front wheels tighter than normal. So they were able to lengthen the wheelbase without sacrificing too much in turning radius. And so by improving wheelbase, then you've got more space for everything in the middle, which is the people and cargo.
That's a great explanation.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's, I'll be curious what the take rate is. Rear-wheel drive versus, are they calling it four-wheel or all-wheel drive?
It'll be all-wheel drive.
All-wheel drive.
It's a full-time system.
Gotcha. It'll be interesting to see what the take rate is for that. I'm intrigued. This just like, I think it's a very evolutionary styling. Powertrain is about, we thought they were going to use that engine, but that'll be a one I'm looking forward to seeing on the show stand. Yeah, I mean, like it, yay or nay? How you feeling about it?
I wish that they had been more adventurous with the styling, because, I mean, this is such a radically different Explorer. I was kind of hoping for something that kind of announced that more. But at the same time, like, Explorer is their second best-selling SUV. They don't want to mess with success. Clearly, the current Explorer speaks to customers. So I understand why they played it safe in that regard. I am excited about this rear drive layout. It
Can't wait to drive it.
Yeah, it should make it pretty good. And what they've announced so far, so that base engine is the turbo 4-cylinder. There's also on the Platinum trim a twin turbo 3-liter V6 with.
That's the Lincoln Continental twin turbo, right?
Yeah, it's detuned a little bit.
I would hope so.
Yeah, it's. Oh, I forget offhand. I think it's like right around 370, 380 horsepower. Yeah, I think on paper, it should be a really good driving SUV. I'm excited for it. Interior is a lot nicer too. And it's got a crazy optional touchscreen. It's 10 inches and it's like this big monolith coming off of the dashboard.
I kind of love where some of these touchscreens are going. Like the Volvo one, Tesla was an early adopter of that. I mean, it's just, yeah, go with it. Okay, so we would be remiss if we didn't mention the other Ford reveal, the Shelby GT500.
Yep.
We don't know much about that. It's going to be awesome, I would assume. I think the horsepower is, like, whatever number they confirm for that, that's going to be great. I imagine fuel economy won't be very good. My guess is this is going to be a fairly evolutionary styling. I think it'll look like the Mustang and like a Shelby GT500. I'm not expecting any crazy, like, things that would really differentiate this car. I would assume there'll be a snake on the right or the left side of the grille. Yeah, I'm excited. It's been a long time since I drove the GT500. That's a magical car, I think. Personally, I would probably get the GT350. I just feel like that car is a little better balanced, a little calibrated better, just in all areas. Man, the GT500 is a rocket ship, though. The last time I drove one, it was awesome. I worked at a different car magazine, in fact. This is a while. I remember accelerating onto a turn by Old Tiger Stadium here in Metro Detroit, and I just, like, literally dropped it into third and nailed it. And I remember everybody in the car was like, "What are you doing? Like, we're turning. You're accelerating into this crazy turn with this, like, rocket ship of a car." So that sticks in my mind. I remember I actually took my grandmother for a ride in the GT500, and she was like, "Wow, this is wild." She was in her 90s at that point, so that's a lot of horsepower, and she was unfazed. So a lot of good memories of the GT500. I'm super stoked about this one. I think this could be a contender for our Best in Show award.
Yeah, it should be crazy. I mean, it'll look like a Mustang, but just like super beefed up. and it should be really, really powerful. Ford has actually announced before this and like teasing it's going to be over 700 horsepower.
Over 700. Okay.
So it's going to be ridiculous. And
Hellcat 707, Demon's like what, 808
so
or something?
The Demon on race gas is 840 horsepower.
840.
And then the Hellcat Red Eye is 797 horsepower on pump gas.
So the Mustang, though, here's the other thing about the Mustang. They don't need to make this 900 horsepower. That's never when a Mustang's really been, you know? Anything over 700 is going to be more than enough. So it's going to be good.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. I think I would be more than happy with the GT350 or even just a Mustang GT. I mean, over 700 horsepower is pretty much useless on public roads. Although I will admit, I did love the Challenger Hellcat Red Eye that we had. That was just silly fun.
Yeah, that's a strong car. I think I took my kid to daycare in that, if I'm remembering right. And it was like, what do you pull up the daycare in that, and it's kind of like, what's going on here? Where is this guy going next?
Yeah, I took my dad for a ride on it and drove through the tunnels on 696.
Good move.
And, the sound was just glorious. The blower whine and the V8 rumble, and at the end of it, my dad was like, I think I just had a religious experience.
So where you drive now is go underneath Cobo, underneath Joe Louis Arena, downtown where the auto show is. It's a very quick, short tunnel, but yeah, you'll hear some cacophony there. You're going to hear some loud noises.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So yeah, Ford, we're excited about the new Mustang. Let's talk about the Supra. Speaking of cars we're pretty psyched about. You and I were talking about this, I think, on a recent podcast, like, they got to show this thing. They're finally doing it, and we're pretty excited about it. But this has been the longest tease ever.
Yeah, and that's why I'm actually not as excited about it, because I'm just like, well, actually, so I just recently watched Monty Python and Holy Grail again, and there's like scenes in that movie where various cast members are like, "Get on with it." That's how I feel about this. It's like just get on with it. Just give us the car. We're sick of waiting. We're sick of teasers. Just give it to us. Which they are, but I've got some pent up frustration from this.
You sound like you're like, hey, get this car now. It's been overdue. One of the early stories when I started at Autoblog was we were reading like patents and trademarks. They were doing that, and everybody's like, well, is the Supra coming back? And then it was like fairly quickly, not like thereafter, Toyota kind of hinted it was coming back. And, we're talking like 4 years ago now. So, all right, enough, complaining about that. The car is going to be here in like 72 hours. I think this is going to really help Toyota really create some buzz around their brand. I think they're going to really rev up the enthusiast base in a way that Toyota could use right now. I think this is something that it'll be a shot in the arm for them. And I mean, pictures are floating around the internet. I think the car's already essentially out there. There's, if you want to know what the Supra looks like, use Google, and it's out there. So, I mean, is this a car that you would be like, want to buy though? Are you a Supra guy, Joel?
Well, see, this is the other part that's had me less than excited about it, is that, I mean, from the sound of it, there's not going to be a manual transmission, and it's going to use the engines from the Z4, none of which seem like super powerful. And I have this bad feeling that the Supra's going to be really expensive. And I feel like that's an issue when you can buy Mustangs and Camaros for really cheap, and they're really good cars now. I mean, it's not like when those things were more like just kind of traditional muscle cars that were a little bit hairy in corners and things. Like now, they do everything really well and for a cheap price. And so, I don't know. I'm just not super enthused about this. I think it's gonna look good. So that I like. But yeah, I'm worried that it's going to be underpowered, too expensive, and not with a manual transmission. And those are some pretty big negatives for a sports car, in my book.
I think probably they're taking a very like practical look at it in this day and age and saying, well, even for sports cars, manual transmission take rate is declining. I think I agree with you. I think just if you're going to do this car, why not put a manual in it? So there's that. I think it's going to look pretty good. I'm excited about it because I am kind of a history, a heritage guy. When you bring back a name like Supra, I always think that's a good thing. But this is for me as far as like how excited am I going to be about this car's existence? They would have to drive it and really see if this engine maybe is better than, just in that execution than it sounds like on paper, because cars could do that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and the price point is going to be really intriguing as well, because you really can't, the way this car is going to stack up, it's not going to be in this like, near premium level. It's going to compete against cars that you could get a lot of power and great handling for a pretty good deal. So Toyota's got to watch it on that front. But overall, I'm pretty optimistic.
Yeah. The other thing for me is that in a lot of ways, I feel like I would be happier buying a Toyota 86 and modifying it a little bit, because it's going to be cheaper for sure. And it's got a manual transmission, and I know it's a blast to drive. And the aftermarket is happy to help you out with like a supercharger or turbocharger to get the horsepower up.
So the thing about that too, though, I think, and this is where Supra wins consumers, is it's just the Supra. The 86 is actually a great name in its own right. BRZ, these cars have been out there for like a decade now, almost. So if you're in the market for something like, oh man, what's that? Oh, that's the Supra. You get some serious curb appeal and bragging rights with the Supra, although your logical approach is entirely logical as well, too.
Yeah. Well, like you said, though, I mean, it will probably come down to having to drive it. And for sure, there are cars that do not measure up on paper that when you actually get a chance to get behind the wheel, make complete and total sense. So I hope that that's going to be the case, but I'm definitely skeptical.
So let's move on a little bit here. We've got the Passat, car that I don't think anybody feels crazy passionate about, but a very important car to debut next week. 2020 new Passat. It's a critical car for VW. They've teased it with the big wheels. That's about all we've seen of this car is the wheels.
Mm-hmm.
But again, by the time you're probably listening to this, this thing will be out there. Yeah, I don't know. Passat, important car. I will be interested to see how much of a design risk they take with it. But we're not expecting any like crazy powertrains or, wild new features.
It's a sensible mid-size family sedan. I mean, it's not going to be crazy, but it will be a big deal for Volkswagen. I mean, last year, Volkswagen still sold more sedans than they sold crossovers, so this is still an important car for them.
Don't forget, too, that I think German brands like Volkswagen has a bit of a different positioning. Like a nicely styled Passat, I think is a very reasonable alternative to, say, stepping all the way up to Audi or a 3 Series for like, that sort of like wonky educated group that like, they're not going to consider domestic. Maybe like Honda and Toyota, like they're not in Nissan. Those brands aren't doing it for them. Volkswagen Passat, that's not going to look out of place in certain neighborhoods. So I think that's a thing that like Volkswagen has tried to do. They've made the Jetta, the Passat look increasingly swanky at times. Like really, I would say even stepping on Audi's toes. But, I would expect more of that for the Passat. Just keep pushing it up market. Okay, so a couple other things. The Lexus LC convertible concept, air quotes, is going to be there. Pretty close to the final convertible, though, from what we're thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I think it looks pretty good. The pictures we've seen, I think Lexus's styling has been very strong in recent years. Not exactly my cup of tea. You a Lexus man?
Well, I love the Lexus LC a whole lot. I love the V8. It sounds so good. It looks so good. I really, 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 really like the LC. I'm conflicted about the convertible because on the one hand, I love the idea of like sunshine and open air and hearing that V8 even better. On the other hand, part of the appeal of the LC is its concept car looks, and cutting the roof off of it. It still looks good, but I like the whole thing. So I'm conflicted. I think I have no problem with it. I think it looks good. I think I might still lean toward the coupe. I do like convertibles, but just in this particular case.
I feel like the theme of this podcast is me saying, hey, I like this kind of wacky segment for no real reason. I just do. And you saying, well, no. This is how this segment should be, and this is the purest take. But I agree with you. The coupe is definitely a dramatic, like it really makes a statement. When you decapitate the roof, it kind of breaks up the flow. I don't know. I think this is going to be a good looking car, fun to drive.
Well, like I said, I mean, I'm conflicted because I think it would be a blast to drive that in the open air and listening to that wonderful, wonderful V8. But I also know that thing was such a styling sensation that I hate to see it cut up. So I'm just internally conflicted.
Well, get to the show next week and we'll see where you land for the final, I guess, verdict, and then you can drive it too.
Yeah.
Subaru is bringing a limited edition STI. They call it the S209. That's pretty cool, actually. I think it's kind of sort of an unexpected, fun little limited edition model to really toss out. I'm more of a WRX guy. I feel like the STI is just a bit much, but this is sweet. I think this is pretty cool. It's we don't know too much about it, but we know it's happening.
Yeah, and it's nice that Subaru is giving us one of its super limited edition hardcore STIs, because usually those are kept like just for Japan. So it's nice that we're getting in on the fun. I'm with you though. On a normal basis, I would probably be a lot happier with just a regular WRX.
This one is going to be a step above, we think, the Type RA, which is also pretty extreme. Mm-hmm. So, Subaru's doing a lot of good things right now. They're playing to their base, like the really hardcore Subarurists, I guess. And they're doing some good things getting up and with the Ascent SUV. And, of course, Outback and Forester are pretty strong, too. So, this to me is just sort of like, we've got all these big picture, initiatives, but we're going to just kind of put a little exclamation point over here. And I think it's a good move.
Well, I mean, Subaru just keeps setting sales records left and right. I mean, they've got money to do like a limited run special edition car with hopefully more power. And so on that note, if anybody from Subaru is listening, could you please give the BRZ some more power next time you do a special edition?
Sounds good. All right, let's spend some money. Sounds like it's always a good time to spend some money. So this comes from Justin in the Washington, D.C. area. About to replace his daily driver. He's got an F82 M4. He's had this since 2016, and he's basically looking at, this was a replacement car. He's got some interesting observations here. This is a great email, but I will sum it up a little bit. And the options he's considering seriously, AMG C63S and the E53 Coupe. He hasn't driven the E53, but he's already spec'd it out how he wants it. The way he figures it is that's going to come out to be about $6,000 more than the C63S, which is how he would take that flavor of brandy, if you will. So those are his, I would say, his two top concerns. Justin, this is a great email. For the purposes of time, we won't read all of the different nuances, but your cars, man. What do you think, Joel?
Yeah, so this is a tricky choice, and I guess I'll start it out by saying I do really love the straight six in the new E53. It's so silky smooth, and it sounds so good when you get on it. It's got this kind of high pitched like straight six howl that it's really exciting. But it is a very smooth. It's a very, very smooth engine, and I really like the sort of like ultra mild hybrid system in it. The way it coasts and things, it's perfectly seamless. It's really nice. I will admit though, if you're really missing, because he mentions that he had older M5 with the twin turbo V8, and I'll admit, like if you're really hankering for the V8 life again, I kind of feel like you've got to go with the C63S, because as much as I love the straight six and the E53, it's still not a V8. I mean, there is just something special about a V8. I guess the other thing that's tricky is that because you do mention that you do want kind of a mileage muncher. The E Coupe is probably a little bit more comfortable, but at the same time, okay, yeah, I'm gonna say go for the C63S because it's gonna be it's gonna be way more comfortable than your M4. He's got an M4 right now, and I totally agree. The M4, that's a stiff, tough, like sport. Like that thing is designed for one thing only. It's to go really fast on tracks and things. The C63S is going to be way more compliant. Mercedes in general, they're usually a lot more comfortable. So I'm going to say go for the C63S. No straight six is going to replace the V8 feeling, and this will still be more comfortable.
That's basically where I landed on this as well. And just kind of like reading, Justin, some of your like preferences here about your, the way you're leading on the powertrain, and also kind of like leading towards the C63S as far as the styling. I mean, the only downside to getting, the C car is it's a little bit smaller. I mean, to me, it's not like you're getting a ton of practical usability with, an E-Class, a hot rod E-Class. So, in coupe form anyway. So, I agree with you guys. C63S, good looking car, powerful. I think it might be kind of the way Justin's leading anyway. So, I guess I'm going to sort of validate that leaning, if you will. And first of all, I don't think you're going to go really wrong with either one of these. But, V8, man, it's tough to replace that. Reese Counts speaks very highly of that inline six. That may be like his favorite engine. He cannot stop talking about it. And it is a really good engine. But I just think for what you're looking to do in this car, the C63S is the way to go.
Yeah, and I think like the E-Class Coupe, I love that engine so much, and it is comfortable. I think it wouldn't be as sporty as what you're accustomed to at this point. Because, it's a little bit AMG, but not like full AMG. The C63S, that's full AMG. It's got the big V8. It's going to be tuned to be closer to a sports car, but still softer than a BMW. So I think that is the best way to go. I think, though, this is definitely one of those where you're definitely going to want to test drive both of them.
That'll be a fun day. Definitely go do that.
Yeah. But yeah, I think we're in agreement. C63S is the way to go. No straight six, as good as it is, can quite replace a V8.
I also think the Mercedes styling is probably best reflected in the C-Class. I think that car just looks a little more elegant and sporty than the E-Class does, regardless of what trim or what, dressing is on it or the powertrain. So that's my just like sort of Mercedes bias right now, is I really like the C-Class as opposed to, some of the bigger cars in the lineup. So, yeah, man, I think we've got the verdict. C63S. Justin, great letter. Thanks for writing. Thanks to everybody for listening. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Autoblog Podcast. Come back next week for all the latest and greatest news from the Detroit Auto Show. It's January. Happy New Year. We'll see you next time.